develop into whatever it's going to develop into. This morning, we are, as far as a message, we're going to continue this idea of growth stories. We're going to keep on going with that series. And the parable that this morning that we're going to look at comes right after what we talked about last week. So it's in Matthew chapter 13, and we ended with Jesus kind of explaining that first parable, the parable of the sower, to his disciples. And so Jesus then goes on, and I guess what happens is he tells the parable of the sower. His disciples are like, wait a minute, Jesus, hang on, pause, time out. Why don't you, you got a captive audience, let's explain this thing, let's teach the crowd. And Jesus kind of turns to his disciples and says, you know what, this is what my plan is. And that's what we talked about last week, right? My plan is you 12 are going to change the world, okay? And that's where he's going to spend his time, and that's where he's going to spend his ministry. And so after having that conversation on the side, he turns back to the crowd. So this is the same crowd, okay, that he's talking to, that got the parable of the sower. Well, they get another farming parable, and it's a parable of the weeds, okay? And this one involves the sower as well. But we're going to go there. So Matthew chapter 13, after Jesus gets done explaining to his disciples the parable of the sower, he gives the crowd another parable. And it says this in verse 24. Jesus presented another parable to them, to the crowd, saying, the kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in his field. But while his men were sleeping, his enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat and left. And when the wheat sprouted and produced grain, then the weeds also became evident. And the slaves of the landowner came and said to him, Sir, did you not sow good seed in your field? How then does it have weeds? And he said to them, an enemy has done this. The slaves said to him, do you want us then to go and to gather them up? But he said, no, while you are gathering up the weeds, you may uproot the wheat with them. Allow both to grow together until the harvest. And at the time of harvest, I will say to the reapers, first gather up the weeds, bind them in bundles, and burn them, but gather the wheat into my barn. So Jesus gives that parable to the crowd, and again, no explanation. He just keeps going. There's a couple other little parables, the parable of the mustard seed, parable of the leaven, and again, no explanation. So it's like getting the explanation or the parable of the guy doing laundry with no explanation. Jesus kind of has a little conversation with his disciples, and then they get the parable of the guy with some dandelions in his field. You know what I mean? It's like there's no explanation. So very confusing for the crowd. But for his disciples, they want to know what's going on. And obviously, people didn't get what was going on because the disciples say, hey, explain this one to us, okay? So, verse 36. We'll jump to verse 36 then. And Jesus, it says this. Then he left the crowds and he went into the house. And his disciples came to him and said, explain to us the parable of the weeds in the field. And he said, the one who sows the good seed is the Son of Man, and the field is the world. And as for the good seed, these are the sons of the kingdom, and the weeds are the sons of the evil one, and the enemy who sowed them is the devil. And the harvest is the end of the age, and the reapers are the angels. So just as the weeds are gathered up and burned with the fire, so shall it be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send forth his angels, and they will gather out of his kingdom all stumbling blocks and those who commit lawlessness, and they will throw them into the furnace of fire. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth, and then the righteous will shine forth like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. The one who has ears, let him hear. All right. So before we get too deep into this parable, I think we need to address what scale this parable is on, okay? So in the parable of the sower, we had a pretty narrow scale, I feel like. I feel like Jesus is addressing individual seeds. He's addressing the planting of the seeds, the growing of those seeds. It's on a small scale, okay? And then when I think Jesus talks with the disciples and he turns back to the crowd, now he's giving them a parable that's like a step back, and now we're on a big scale, okay? So this parable is not a parable of individual seeds. Jesus says this is the parable of the world, okay? And that word cosmos, the world, is not like the earth. It's like all of creation. Everything, eternity. So you throw eternity in there. So this is the field. Cosmos, it doesn't mean just earth. It doesn't mean it means the universe. It means everything, okay? So this parable is on that big of a scale. okay? So don't get trapped in narrowing it too small, because I don't think that's Jesus' intent. So when Jesus says the kingdom of heaven is like this, he's not talking about the kingdom of heaven is like you, right? And there's an enemy there and he's trying to plant weeds in your life. Like, that's not the scale. That's not what Jesus is saying. Not with this parable. And this is not the church and the enemy's trying to plant weeds in the church. This is the universe, okay? This is all of creation. This is on the scale of, here's what God is doing throughout eternity. Here's what you need to know about everything, eternity. That's the field, okay? And I think that's Jesus' intention, because what happens if we get too narrow, we start to go, oh yeah, I know one of those weeds. I know one of those weeds. That's a son of a devil right there, right? And we start to make those assumptions, and I don't think that's what Jesus' point is in this. So, when Jesus starts to explain this thing, he really lays it out. He's like, listen, the sower is the Son of Man. In other words, that's me, Jesus is saying, right? I'm the sower, okay? This is what God is doing in this field, in this creation, and I'm the sower. And I'm planting seeds, okay? The seeds are the son of the kingdom, or sons of the kingdom. The bad ones, the weeds, those are the sons of the devil. And the enemy are sons of the evil one. And the devil is the enemy, okay? He lays it out. There's not a lot of room for like, well, I don't know about this, right? He lays it out pretty clearly. And so with this parable, Jesus is saying, listen, in this field, in all of creation, in the world, here's what God is doing with the sower, with the Son of Man. Here's what he's doing. He's planting sons of the kingdom. He's planting seeds in order to grow a specific crop, right? And that crop is going to grow in order to get a specific harvest. So Jesus says the Son of Man intends to grow a specific crop, and in order to do that, you got to plant a specific seed. When you plan to have a specific harvest, you plant a specific seed, okay? And Jesus has done that. Jesus has done that. The field is all of creation, and the sower is the Son of Man, Jesus himself. And the goal is for the Son of Man, the goal of Jesus is to plant in the field of all creation sons of the kingdom that will bring about a harvest of righteousness. Okay? And we know that because in verse 43, as Jesus is explaining this thing, he says, the righteous will shine forth like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. The righteous are the sons of the kingdom. You see what I'm saying? So Jesus is explaining this to his disciples, and he says, listen, my goal, the point of the Son of Man coming is to have a harvest of righteousness. And it's going to happen because of the sons of the kingdom that are planted in this. That's what I'm doing. And I love the line from this parable when he says, the kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed. Good seed. There's nothing wrong with the seed that he planted, okay? There's nothing wrong with the seed that he planted. There's no problem with what God is doing. It's good. It's the right stuff, okay? It's the right seed. It's seed as it should be. That sounds an awful lot like our definition of what we understand God's doing in us, right? God has made us righteous when we're born again, when we're made new, we're as we ought to be, okay? The Son of Man intends to grow a crop of righteous people, and what he plants is good seed that will grow into a crop of righteousness. Now again, this is a big scale, okay? This is what he's doing across all of eternity. This is why Jesus came. This is what he's telling you. All of eternity. So the Son of Man is growing a crop of righteousness, or a crop that he will then have a harvest of righteousness. Jesus is growing his kingdom, and he's growing a kingdom of people who are what they're supposed to be. And at the end of time, what is harvested is righteousness, which is life as God intended it, in relationship with him, okay? Now, the problem in this metaphor, the problem in the story that Jesus is telling, is that while the sower has something in mind, and while the sower is doing something specific, he planted a good seed that would grow into a harvest of the thing that he wanted, there's an enemy that also had something in mind, okay? And what the enemy tries to do is he tries to ruin or diminish in some way the end result of what the sower gets from this field. And when I was talking about talking about this whole series, and I mentioned this story with the staff, and I just said, we're going to talk about the parable of the weeds, where an enemy goes to get back at the sower, and he plants weeds in his field. Jeremy piped up with, "Wow, we've really changed the way we get back at our enemies, haven't we? We planted weeds in my garden," right? Like, not a real effective way to get back at somebody if that's your goal. You would think if he really wanted to get back at him, he'd like burn his house, right? Or he'd burn the field once the wheat came up, or he'd plow it under, or whatever. But he doesn't do that. He just plants weeds. And I think what we see is that the actions of the enemy in this story that Jesus is telling, the actions of the enemy tell us that the enemy knows he really can't do anything to the field. He really can't do anything to the seed that's been planted, or the harvest, or the crop that's going to grow up. He really can't do anything to the sower. So what does he do? He does the only thing he can do, and that's try to mess with the crop that's going to grow and the harvest that's going to happen. We know that the devil doesn't stand a chance against our God. He knows that he doesn't stand a chance. In fact, he knows it's already done. It's over, right? The devil does. So what can he do? Well, he can try and mess with the crop as it grows. And we read that the enemy plants weeds in order to do that. He plants weeds, sows his seed out there. But specifically the weeds that he plants, when you look at other translations or other versions of this scripture, it says he plants tares, T-A-R-E-S, tares, okay? You may have heard that term. I don't know what tares are, right? So it's helpful that the translation we read says weeds because, that's good. But it's more helpful to know what tares are, and specifically because tares is a specific kind of weed, and the weed that it is it's more commonly it's known, I don't even know how to pronounce this, but I'm going to just say it's either darnel or darnel, right? Right? But I'm going to say darnel. It's darnel. And it's important to know that this is a specific thing that Jesus is talking about. It's important to know that it's a specific weed because darnel or tares looks like wheat, okay? Very similar. In fact, it's known as false wheat. And that's why in the parable, when Jesus says it's planted, it's not until it sprouts and produced grain that they know that it's a weed, that there's weeds there, because darnel looks like wheat looks like darnel until they produce grain. Until there's some kind of fruit there, okay? Until then, they look the same. And so the enemy knows when he's planting this stuff that it's going to look the same until it starts to produce seed. And by that time, according to our story, it's too late because if you go through and you pull up the darnel, you pull up the tares, you're going to uproot what actually is supposed to be planted, okay? So you got to wait till the end, until it's time for harvest. So the enemy knows that. Now think about what it does to have weeds in the field. What does it do? The weeds begin to come up, they begin to crowd out, right? They begin to compete with the seed, with the wheat that's actually supposed to be planted. I think the intention of the enemy in sowing weeds in the field is not, he sowed weeds in my field, right? He's going to cause me more trouble. The intention of the enemy is to crowd out. It's to compete with the wheat, okay? It's to offer, he did it by offering or by planting a counterfeit product of what the sower planted. because it's going to compete for, it's going to take up space in the field. Now, remember what the field is. The field is eternity. That's the scale we're talking about, right? So something has been planted that is a counterfeit that's going to compete for the same resources of what's actually supposed to be growing, the wheat. So the enemy knows that the seed that's already planted, the wheat that's already planted, has been planted. He knows he can't do anything with that. He can't change the wheat into a weed, right? He can't do that. But what he can do is he can offer an alternative, or he can put something out there that's going to compete with the resources that the wheat is supposed to have. So the sower planted a specific crop. So he wanted a specific crop. He wanted a specific harvest, so he planted a specific seed. But when the sower planted his seed, the enemy planted a counterfeit seed in order to compete and to confuse. We're in the middle of a war, all right? The enemy knows that the war has been decided. He knows Jesus, the Son of Man, has sown the seed. He's done what was necessary to plant the crop that will grow and will be a harvest of righteousness. You can't do anything about that. You can't change a wheat into weed. He knows the Son of God has planted good seed in the world and then is going to bear that crop of righteousness. And he can't do anything about it. But what he can do and what he has done is to sow something that's going to compete with it. That's going to try and compete with the wheat as it grows and as it matures into that seed. So what the enemy has done is he's plant things that look like what the sower planted, the sons of righteousness. And he's planted it in the field, but really it's counterfeit. The enemy knows that the only thing that he could do is to try to plant his own thing that looks similar but has totally different results. Totally different results. What the enemy has planted does not produce righteousness. It produces something very similar, but is very different when it's harvested. When it's harvested, it is counterfeit righteousness. Fake righteousness. False righteousness. It's life that looks like what it's supposed to look like, but it's not. Make sense? What kind of righteousness is a counterfeit righteousness? Where it looks the same as it grows, but the fruit is totally different. What is it? Counterfeit righteousness is produced by any effort other than the grace of Jesus Christ. Anything other than grace. Anything other than the grace of Jesus Christ will produce false righteousness. So any form of self-righteousness, that's that word, right? Self-righteousness. Any attempt other than the grace of Jesus Christ at being as you were meant to be as a human being will lead to false righteousness. Whether that attempt is religious Christianity, where we're trying to stand before God without shame, but we can't do it because we always fail. Or whether it's any other kind of religion, right? Name all the religions: Buddhism, Hinduism, Islam, the occult, universalist spirituality, paganism, hedonism. Think about it. All of those things are an attempt to try and be fulfilled and to try to have a life that is fulfilled in what it's meant to be. All of those things. Anything other than the seed that the Son of Man plants is counterfeit, and it will not bear the fruit of righteousness. And what I mean by the fruit of righteousness is relationship with God and life as you were meant to experience it. What you were created for. It's the very reason that he breathed the breath of life into Adam so that we might walk in relationship with him. Christ came as the only way for us to be brought back into that relationship. And anything else falls short and cannot produce relationship with God that he intended. So any attempt to be a human, as humans were meant to be, to have a life that you were meant to experience outside of Christ, it's a losing effort. That's what we're saying. Understanding that we are righteous right now, if we have been born again in Christ, is the fruit and is the harvest of righteousness. It is the reality that I stand right now as I was meant to be in relationship with God, as a human being, in relationship with God, and it's by no other means than Jesus Christ. That I am loved, I am redeemed, and now I am pleasing to God because of Jesus alone. And false righteousness, counterfeit righteousness, crowds out that reality in our world. What the enemy has planted are lookalikes. They're weeds, right, that promise the path to fulfillment, but can never give you what you desire, you will never find what you're looking for, because the grace of Jesus Christ is the only way to have that relationship with God that you were created for. The enemy has planted this counterfeit seed in order to crowd out, in order to offer alternatives, in order to distract, to confuse what righteousness is and how it's attained. Righteousness is to be as you were meant to be. And you were meant to be in relationship with God. Therefore, righteousness is relationship with God. And nothing can produce that except new birth in Jesus Christ. Can't happen. It can produce things that look like it, make you kind of feel fulfilled, but it can't produce it. In explaining this parable, Jesus uses this term. He says, the good seed are the sons of the kingdom. He says the evil seed are the sons, or the weeds are the sons of the evil one, right? Or you might say the sons of the devil, okay? Jesus uses that term, that idea of the sons of the devil, in one other place, all right? In John chapter 8, after this interaction with the woman that's caught in adultery, right? So they bring this woman forward, and they say, you know, Moses says that the law says we need a stoner, and Jesus says, all right, well then you who are without sin, go ahead and throw the first stone. Nobody can throw it, right? So they walk away. But there's still a crowd there. There's still a group of onlookers who maybe didn't have a stone in their hand, but they were on it, right? They were ready for it. And Jesus is still having that conversation with that crowd of people when he says this. He says, I speak of the things which I have seen with my Father, therefore you also do the things which you heard from your father. They answered and said to him, Abraham's our father. Jesus said to them, if you're Abraham's children, do the deeds of Abraham. But as it is, you're seeking to kill me, a man who has told you the truth, which I heard from God. This Abraham did not do. You're doing the deeds of your father. Jesus is talking on different levels than these people, right? Clearly, they are not getting it. And they said to him, well, we were not born as a result of sexual immorality. We have one Father, God. Jesus said to them, if God were your Father, you would love me. For I came forth from God and am here, and I have not even come on my own, but he sent me. Why do you not understand what I'm saying? It's because you cannot listen to my word. There's that idea again that he's speaking, and they aren't catching it. Why? Because they can't hear. They don't have ears to hear. But here's the point where he says, you are of your father, the devil, and you want to do the desires of your father. He was a murderer from the beginning, and he does not stand in the truth because there is no truth in him. Whenever he tells a lie, he speaks from his own nature because he is a liar and he's the father of lies. The sons of the devil, you are of your father, the devil. That's a strong statement, right? Is Jesus really saying like you are of the devil? Is that what he... I tend to think that he's addressing this idea again, like, listen, you want the desires of your father, you've bought into the counterfeit righteousness, okay? And you bought into the idea that right relationship with God comes through obeying law or doing or not doing. Jesus said, if you were children of Abraham, like you say you were, then you would do the deeds of Abraham. Well, what are the deeds of Abraham? The deeds of Abraham are faith. That's what Abraham did. That's what the covenant of Abraham was based on, faith. Trust God. God laid out the covenant, right? Abraham walked in it. Like, trust God. Do the deeds of Abraham, which are faith. That was Abraham's covenant, believing God, having faith that God was going to do what he said he was going to do. And Abraham's faith was counted to him as righteousness. That's the deed of Abraham. Faith and believing that God has accomplished it. So Jesus is pointing to this religious way of living, and he's saying you're getting lost in the weeds of the enemy. The lie is that you are capable of maintaining a relationship with God on your own. That's self-righteousness. The truth is, it's all Jesus, and all you can do is trust him in that. Faith. Believe him. When he said that this relationship is established by him and it's kept by him when you trust him. It's faith. And what the enemy has planted are lies that bring about counterfeit righteousness. It's a lie that there is anything else other than Jesus Christ for your righteousness. And that lie on the surface looks very similar to faith. It even produces a seed that looks similar to righteousness. But it's the spirit of religion and self-righteousness. And that's what keeps you from growing and maturing into who you are. Listen to this. The problem with darnel being planted is not only that it looks like wheat as it grows. Not only that it competes for space in the field, but part of the problem with it is that it does produce a grain, but the grain is poisonous. All right? There is a fungus that grows in darnel in 70 to 80% of the grain, the grain that it produces. There's a fungus in there, and the fungus makes people ill. It makes people vomit, makes people hallucinate. It is not good for you. In fact, it's the same kind of fungus that carries the compound that's found in LSD. Right? LSD was found in, or the compound was found by, I don't know who it was, but it was a ergo fungus, ERGO, on a rye, on this darnel, on a rye seed. It's the same kind of fungus. It's not good for you, right? It's not good for you. There's a theory out there that darnel, this fake wheat, harvested along with some other wheat and then processed and put in bread and fed to people. There's a theory out there that is the thing. People eating that was responsible for kicking off the Salem witch trials because it created hallucinations and erratic behavior, and they didn't have an explanation for it, right? It's not good for you. It's not good for you. The counterfeit crop is poisonous. Where wheat is a grain that is harvested and ground into flour and built and made into bread to sustain you for your life, to build you up, to give you strength. Jesus said, I'm the bread of life. The false wheat, the counterfeit wheat disorients you, confuses you, makes you hallucinate, makes you see things that aren't there. It makes you weak and ill, just where the enemy wants you. So in all of creation, in all of eternity, Christ has planted seeds of the sons of the kingdom so that he has a harvest of righteousness. And the enemy has planted counterfeit seeds, and where the sons of the kingdom will produce a harvest of righteousness, the counterfeit seed produce a spirit of religion. And on the outside, they look very similar, but the difference shows up in the fruit. The difference in righteousness by Christ and self-righteousness in the spirit of religion shows up in the fruit. In Matthew chapter 7, Jesus is again addressing this idea of fruit, all right? Verse 15. He says, beware of the false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. Looks the same on the outside, sheep's clothing, but inwardly it's not the same, right? You will know them by their fruits. Grapes are not gathered from thorn bushes, nor figs from thistles, are they? So every good tree bears good fruit, but the bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, nor can a bad tree bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. So then you will know them by their fruits. Listen to me. The difference shows up in the fruit. We can have a conversation, we can be saying the same words, we can have similar experiences, but the difference shows up in the fruit. If you've got religion, whether it's Christian in form or not, it's not going to produce righteousness. Okay? It's not going to produce life as it was meant to be, an experience with living with God as you were meant to experience. It's going to produce self-righteousness. And out of self-righteousness comes a spirit of discontentedness, a spirit of comparison, a spirit of competition, a spirit of, but what about them, Lord? Look at them. Look at what they're doing, right? That's what it produces. Because self-righteousness is all about what I've done or what I can do in order to experience this relationship with God compared to, well, what you've done, right? But understanding that you are a son or a daughter of God because he made you new, and only because he made you new, leads to an understanding that I've got nothing to prove, then I've got nothing to lose. Because it's all about him. And it's all about what he's done. I get to live in relationship with my God at peace because I know what he's done. And I get to live in relationship with my God at rest, trusting he's already accomplished everything that needs to be done in order for me to experience life as I was meant to live it, with God, in relationship with God. And oh, by the way, in that, there's no competition and there's no comparison because it's all about Jesus, right? That's the fruit. You will know them by their fruit. Sons of the kingdom will produce righteousness, which is rest and peace. Sons of the evil one will produce religion and self-righteousness. What's the fruit of righteousness? What's the harvest he's talking about? What's the fruit of the Spirit, right? That's where you go. What's the fruit of the Spirit? Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Right? We're going to sing the song. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. That's the fruit of the Spirit. That's the fruit of righteousness in your life. What's the fruit of religion? Competition, anxiety, discontentedness, pride, condemnation. False righteousness, self-righteousness cannot produce love. Because in self-righteousness, I'm loving because I'm obligated to love. I have to. Well, that's not love at all, is it? If you're obligated to. Self-righteousness cannot produce joy. It can produce happiness for a time until you mess up. And then you're not happy anymore. It can produce pride, but it cannot produce joy. Righteousness by self-effort cannot produce peace. Self-righteousness is always about me doing enough on my own. Doing enough of the right thing and then wondering if I did enough of the right thing. That's not peace. That's anxiety. Can self-righteousness produce patience? Are you kidding me? Self-righteousness can't produce patience. Like that self-righteousness says, pick yourself up by your bootstraps for goodness sakes. I did it. Let's go. Get with the program. That's not patience. Go down the list. Anything other than trusting Christ does not bear the fruit of the Spirit. It might look like it on the outside, but it's not. It's not genuine and it's not lasting. And what does Jesus say in this parable about the destiny of a crop of self-righteousness? It said it's collected and it's thrown away in the fire. It's burnt. It's not worth anything. Our God has done the work of planting what is required for a harvest of righteousness. That's what he's doing in this world. Trusting the work of Christ to be sufficient and complete is the only way to experience life as a human being as it was meant to be lived. And if we understand that's the definition of righteousness, one, as he was meant to be, what we were meant to be is to live life with God, filled with the Spirit of God in us. By definition, Christ is the only means for that reality. Anything else falls short, and it's counterfeit of what God wants for you. And you will never experience life as God has intended it. People ask all the time, what is the point of life? What's God's will for my life? What's the purpose of life? The purpose of life is relationship with God. And if you understand that Christ has done what was necessary, he planted the seed, and you say, yeah, I want to be one of those sons. He's done the work that's necessary, right? And he will grow you to maturity. It's like Philippians 1:6, right? He will complete the good work that he began in you. I don't know on what timeline, but he'll complete it, right? It'll grow to maturity. And at the end of the age, when he collects into his barn his own, that's the righteous, right? That is what it's like. You're living life right now in relationship with God because that's what you were meant to be. But at the end of the age, now we're really living life right now as it was meant to be in relationship with God, right? Eternity starts now. And Christ says, I've done the work. I planted the seed. Something else has been planted alongside it, and it's counterfeit. Don't believe it. It looks similar, but you'll see the difference in the fruit. In your life and the lives of the people around you. And honestly, he says it's going to grow up together, right? That's never going away. The idea of religion, self-righteousness, it's never going away until the end. When he says, I'm done with that. And I'm going to take home my harvest. Why don't y'all stand up to your feet? There is such peace in my understanding, in my life, in resting in the knowledge that Christ has done it all. It's all been done. Okay? And that doesn't lead me personally to sit on my laurels and sit on my hands and say, well, Christ did it all. It leads me to an understanding of saying, Christ did it all. Look, you want to know too. I know you want to know because this is what you were built for. You were built for this life with Christ, right? And then I get to live out of that in relationship with God as I try and live in relationship with other people. And there's growing and there's maturing, but it's not out of my effort. It's out of him alone. It's out of him alone. Let's continue to worship and let's minister to one another. I don't know if you're empty. I don't know if you're half full. I don't know if you're 3/4 full. Maybe you're all the way full, and maybe you're ready to minister to somebody else. But move during this time. Pray for one another. Say, I need prayer, right? Let's just move and let's continue to worship.